Oops, I just turned it off. Well, welcome to the third. Okay, we'll go ahead and begin as other people continue to join the session. Welcome to CEASD's second data summit. For some of you who may be new to this particular type of session, we will go ahead and kind of explain the procedure. We do have interpreters. We have some champ interpreters. We have Kat, and then we have another interpreter. I'm not sure. Oh, that's right, Tony. I'm hoping Kat wasn't the only one today. So we do have two interpreters for the entire session. Whoever is on video will be hosting this particular session. So today it's going to be myself and Wyatt. For the others, if we could have you turn off your videos, keeping in mind that when you have questions or when we're ready for a discussion, that's when you can turn on the video. Oh, I also forgot to introduce Michelle. I am so sorry. Michelle has been involved with this data discussion ever since we began. We have already disseminated the agenda, and we are going to be very rigid in following the time because we understand that some comments can take a while. However, we have the chat feature on Zoom. Please feel free to utilize that. If we have time for comments, we will allow those things, but we want to ensure that we are hitting our three main topics. The first one is the Deaf Education Data Summit procedure, just the rough draft that we wanted to develop. So we want to thank Michelle and her team for helping us draft that policy and procedure. There was a lot of work that went into that, so we are very grateful. We do have this draft for you all to discuss and throw out your feedback. We're going to spend about 20 minutes on that. Our second 20 minutes will be focusing on the data repository. Where are we going to hold this data? So there are some suggestions that have been thrown out already. We just want to take a pulse of the community to see where the best place for the data repository to be held. Thirdly, we are going to discuss the type of data. As we all know, it is a very broad umbrella. We may want to hone that down so that we're not collecting all types of data, but the important and immediate data that we will need. We will also be talking about establishing committees from those who joined today for each of our three topics. If you are interested in the procedure, some may be interested more in the analysis or discussion of the data. And then some may be interested in the data fields that we are going to be collecting. So we will establish committees for each of those three areas. Let me give you a little bit of background. The first session actually occurred back in February, and that's where individuals came together. We talked about the research currently out there in the field, had really good dialogue, and that's where we decided to hone in on the three topics I previously mentioned. Now, everyone has a self-interest in this, as we all are stakeholders. But with the research, we wanted to hold off on that, make sure that we had Wyatt Hall brought in so that we could utilize his expertise. Right now, we want to focus on school academic data, those who are involved in the daily collection and analysis of data, making sure that we can develop that and then later bring in the research and integrate it. What else is needed throughout the research field and then build from there. Making sure that we have a well-honed data center. Now, data is going to be part of CEASD's new strategic plan, which will take place in April, beginning our next 3-year planning process. So we are going to incorporate that, and we will be having discussions every month on the first Thursday of the month to make sure that we are integrating this well. Our next meeting, large meeting for the Data Summit, will be in February before CEASD's conference. At the conference, we will present it to board members and general members to make sure that we are getting the perspectives of all superintendents involved. We have several data experts and leaders of schools in this discussion, and the purpose is not necessarily to include them into discussion, but to make sure that we have some oversight. We do have our data individuals today to really focus on. I believe I summed everything up, but Wyatt, Michelle, did you have anything to add? No, really good job summing everything up, Wyatt. I just wanted to take a moment to add about my background because, I got in touch with Jeff regarding this. I would like everyone to keep in mind that about 2 years ago, I had a good working relationship with CEASD Fremont. They handed over some of their data in response to the Boston University research that was occurring. Whether it was hearing or deaf parents, if students came into the deaf school, CEASD Fremont, before the age of 3, they actually thrived academically and were able to have good progress. And so it didn't matter if the parents were hearing or deaf, it was that early exposure to deaf education and communication. And so having that collaboration, is going to be key, because individual schools fighting this battle on their own is tough. So having a well-honed army with data as the support is going to be more effective. And so I saw Jeff sit in front of Congress and explain why they needed funding from the legislature to ensure that all of this happened. My vision grew after seeing Jeff do that. And so, occasionally there are times when research asks some of those questions, but I really wanted to see the support for deaf education in the schools in general. Yeah. When I was sitting in front of Congress, I had Wyatt right behind me and Michelle right behind me, and we were passing notes. I want to make sure that that happens. Okay. So that was the opening for the Data Summit today. So for all of our data individuals that are here today, if you could go ahead and show your video. I just want you to introduce your name, where you're from, and what your role is. So we're going to do some quick introductions. Let's go for it. Jessica, we'll start with you.
There we go. All right, now I'm on. It's easier just to have the interpreter interpret for me today. Good afternoon. I'm Jess Meisner. I am from Rochester School for the Deaf in New York State. I am the Director of Curriculum and Instruction here, and I have been in this position for going into my 6th year at RSD, but have been in deaf education for over 20 years.
Great, thank you so much. And then we'll go to Julie. Hi there. Okay, I am Julie Miles, and I am here at the Oregon School for the Deaf. And I just recently came into this position about 2 years ago. So I'm still kind of on my learning curve right now. I am very motivated to be a part of this discussion though. Now we'll go to Lori. Hi, I'm Lori Oots. I am from the Clare Center, and I do some oversight on evaluations and research, and I've been involved in this for about 21 years. Do you mind if those who have already introduced themselves go ahead and hide your video again so that we have more room on the screen? Perfect. Okay, now we'll go to Oren.
Good morning. Still morning here in Arizona. My name is Oren. I'm with the Arizona State Schools for the Deaf and Blind. I'm the director of the Organizational Development Division, and I've been here for about 5 years. Pleasure to meet you all.
Great, thank you so much, Oren. Let's go to Dr. Gretchen Cobb.
Hello, everybody. I'm Gretchen Cobb. I'm the Director of Statewide Services at Arkansas School for the Deaf. I have been in this position for maybe 9 months. Prior to that, I was high school English teacher here at the School for the Deaf. My background is in deaf education. I've been the data analyst on our district for about 2 or 3 years, and the district testing coordinator for the last maybe 2 years. So I'm very excited to be here as well.
Great, thank you so much. Let's go to Alyssa.
I am from Idaho School for the Deaf and Blind, and I'm an administrative assistant here, and I also take care of our data information here as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Moving on to Crystal.
Hi, I'm Crystal. I actually am from the American School for the Deaf, and I am the administrative assistant to the assistant executive director. However, I also coordinate all of the IEPs for the entire school. And for the past couple of years, I've kind of been the database analysis person, taking care of all of that. So for the past couple of years.
All right, thank you, Crystal. Moving on to Todd. Hello there, everyone. I'm Todd Furlong, and I am the director here. Which deaf school? I'm sorry, Wisconsin Deaf School. So I handle the data here at Wisconsin. Okay, moving on to Ryan. Hi there, everyone. I'm Ryan, and I am from the Minnesota State School for the Deaf, MSSD. And I am a coordinator and work heavily in the data analysis field. Thank you. Okay, moving on to Agent. Hi, I'm actually Amy Dent, and I am from the Iowa School for the Deaf here, and I am the coordinator. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, West Pennsylvania School for the Deaf, interpreter error, correction. I am hearing, so I did hear the interpreter. I apologize. I am the coordinator for student information data assessments, and I've been doing that for the past 2 years. Prior to that, I was with curriculum assessment. And then prior to that, honestly, for about 5 years, I did that. And then I've been involved in all of this for about 20 years now. So Mendel Hall, Greg asked me to come here, so get some information. Okay, great. Tamara. Hi, I am Tamara from the Texas School for the Deaf. And I am in a new role. Some of you may know Donna Altuna, who was our data coordinator for a long time. She has now retired, so I have taken over this position. And I am new in this role, so it's very nice to meet you all. All right, Rebecca. Hi there, I'm Rebecca. I'm from the Iowa School for the Deaf, and I am the principal there. And I've come just to glean some information to see who the best person is from ISD to be involved in this field. So we're not exactly sure who we are going to select yet, but we want to make sure that we have a specific data person in the future to get involved. All right, great. Thank you so much. Scott. Hi there, I'm Scott Tresball, and I'm sorry, Florida School for the Deaf. And my current role is as the admin for instructional services. Before that, I did data assessments and analysis. All right, thank you so much, Tara. Hi there, I'm Tara Wilkins. This is my sign name, and I am from Colorado School for the Deaf and Blind. And my current role is actually Director of Curriculum and Instruction Assessments. I've been doing that for about 12 years. And prior to that, I taught for around 7 years. Now my responsibilities are endless. I wear multiple hats, as I'm sure all of us do. But I am responsible for keeping the information services for all of our on-campus state assessments, district assessments, and collecting all of that information related to state accreditation and so forth. So I am the main person here responsible for the data. All right, let's move on to Stacy. Hi there, everyone. I am Stacy Hausman, and I am from California School for the Deaf, Riverside campus. And I am here, I have been here for 27 years, and I work in the middle school as a teacher first, and then I transitioned to a high school teacher. And then I moved over into the data assessment department, and now I'm a part of the curriculum department. So my current title is Student Outcomes Specialist. And I've been doing that for about 8 years now. Well, I think 8-9 years. Okay, great. Thanks so much, Stacy. Todd? Hi there. My name is Todd Williams, and I am from the Illinois School for the Deaf. And I am here as the Evaluation Center Director. All right, great. Welcome. Shannon? Good morning. I am from the Northwest. I am Shannon Graham from the Washington School for the Deaf. Washington Farriers, all right. It's our homecoming today. Anyways, I do work in curriculum assessment as a coordinator, and I've been doing that for about 8 years. I love data, so I am looking forward to the in-depth discussion here. All right, and then we have Barbara. Hello, everyone. My name is Barbara Raimondo, and I am the Executive Director for CEASD. Nice to see everyone here today and participating with us. Okay, and now we have Denise. Hi, I'm Denise Taylor, and I am the Director of Student Services here at California School for the Deaf, Riverside. And I actually brought in last minute another person. I apologize for us wearing our masks. Hi, I'm Rory, and I am the Access Interpreter or Access Enrollment Coordinator here at Riverside. Oh, great. Yeah, we used to work at another school. Yeah, we pulled them over. All right. I also saw someone type in chat, Lindsay, who for some reason cannot turn on her camera, seems to have some technical difficulties. So we do have another person here. If you want to make sure that you take a gander at her name, we are going to go ahead and switch interpreters at this time.
Looks like we have a wonderful group of individuals here from all over the country. Looks like we've got almost about 40 different deaf schools represented out of 63 schools total. So we've got a good group today. Perfect. Let's go ahead and jump right in. I'm sure everyone has had a chance to look at the procedural manual already. Deaf Education Data Center Procedural Manual. This is really in a draft form. Michelle Tanner and her team from Utah developed this draft. It's very nice. The CEASD board, as of 2 weeks ago, has looked through it and does like it. Before we make any changes, we wanted to present this to our data folks and bring in your experience in working with data. Do you guys have any thoughts or recommendations that you want to bring forward? This is really your opportunity to share this. You don't have to share everything today. If you haven't had a chance to look through it, I know there's a lot of information. And as thoughts trickle through down the road, feel free to email those to either Barbara Raimondo or myself, and we will pull those items together and discuss how we can make changes to tidy this up. As we move forward, we will not touch on everything. So if anyone has any thoughts or comments, please bring them forward. If not, we'll move forward to a few other areas where we're looking to have more discussion. Okay, would anyone like to volunteer to start with sharing your comments as far as the procedural manual? Oh, nice meeting. We're done. Let's go. Nice. Everyone likes everything proposed. Yeah. You know I like a short meeting. Okay, I'll probably go ahead and start with some comments, and as people jump in to tag along, that's great. So feel free to jump up at any time. If you turn your video on, that's like raising your hand, and I will invite you to share your comments. Feel free to use the chat if you prefer. Based on prior meetings or our meeting in February, in addition to board discussion, we feel that the data should belong to CEASD, and that becomes the holder or the repository for the data. How do we feel about that? Does anyone have any thoughts or any trepidation, feeling another option would be better? We'd like to open this up.
shoot up on
Looks
it.
good. Okay, no responses. Oh, okay, yes, go ahead. Oren?
So one question we have at ASDB is really about the encrypting of the student data. We're just curious as to how do we send it to you to make sure that the student information, specific student information data isn't trackable?
Good question. In discussions with a few data centers and individuals who handle data, typically we just follow HIPAA regulations with that information. So we'll have a system in place where information can be sent in and continue to be encrypted and confidential. That concern seems to be diminishing, similar to any other research. Wyatt may know more than me when it comes to other researchers. There are methods to track that without having personal information for the students. We can redact that and maintain all of the data. So that's how we envision this. Wyatt, go ahead. And let me know if I'm off the mark here. I imagine that all of the data pulled together in this center will not have any identifiable information or student information. The intent is not to evaluate the students themselves, but more to evaluate things on a school level, on a national level, and how that trickles down. So it's not about the individual and comparing individuals to other individuals. So we're not looking to carry forward names and that type of information. We will want some demographic data for the purpose of analysis, but we're not looking to take in social security numbers, birth dates, or things like that, nothing identifiable. And that's just my understanding. Is that correct, Jeff? Yes, that is correct, Wyatt. What I had in discussion with a few others is that each student will be identified via a number or an identification number of some sort. So we can do short-term analysis, and we could do it by year, or we could do it by longitudinal data over time, and that's really how we're envisioning this process. Of course, we'll talk about this more in depth as we get closer to making this happen and what information we really want to collect. Is that clear, Oren? Yeah, thank you. Okay, Jessica, Jess? Just to follow up in regards to that question, I just want to make sure that everyone's aware. New York State does have a new law as of this year. No recognizable student information can be shared outside of school jurisdiction. We can look at information and say, oh, if we say, oh, that's a particular student and we know whose name it is, then it's that particular information, and that's information that we are not legally allowed to share anymore here in New York State. And that's pretty common with most states, yeah. Tamara? I did have a question. As far as who owns the data, what does the exact information say? Because there may be a conflict of interest where some of us have to report data to other entities, such as data systems. And so if they have the same information, I want to make sure that we look at the legal stipulations here and how we understand that, so we don't hit any conflicts with that type of information. Thank you. And Wyatt may know more than I do here. All researchers have an IRB agreement in place, and this same concept will apply to this type of assessment. When we get to the point of establishing the data, we will set up an agreement with each school, or a contract, if you will, in addition to each individual child. And that's where complexity comes in. And that's something that will come in down the road. So it really depends on what kind of data is being collected, and that will determine things. Some data may be more specific to the child, where we'll have to have parental consent. We'll make sure it's still not identifiable. We don't identify the child. Some data may be more general school information, and we don't need consent for the individual. And so we'll have two different types of data, and that's what we're looking to collect. But consent will be in place, contracts will be in place, agreements. If here at ASD, I want to know, for example, 4th grade, what 4th grade students are looking like as far as their language development. We'll reach out to the data center, wherever it may be at that time. We'll share the general data based on everything that's been collected and brought together. We can look at that and assess that data. In addition to that, if I want to find which states have the best English development or growth or for middle school ages, we can target those parameters and really assess that particular school and see why that they're the best at that. And maybe we can find what's at the root of that. Is it the students? Is it the teachers? Is it the instructional process and the curriculum being provided? And we can use that information and apply it to other schools who are looking to grow in the same way. I essentially call our schools silos. What we've been doing is been in silos. And so, what are the best practices that we can steal from other schools and really implement so that we can all thrive together? That's the kind of direction we want to take this data. And so we want to make sure it's not clearly identifiable for the individual. And it is a process that will develop as we learn through it. Perfect. So it sounds like every state needs to collect data and make sure that we're abiding by legal strictures for sharing that data, because some states may have different parameters. So I want to make sure that we check on our individual states to make sure we do things accurately, because we do report what we do if we provide data. And then you're saying that it belongs to CEASD. Can I still share that data? So there's some legal information boundaries there to cross. Wyatt, just to clarify here, what we have in mind, for your school, you have your respective data, and you don't really give that to anyone. You would make a copy and share that. So you would still hold the data, you'd still own your data for your own purposes and your own reporting. So CEASD would own essentially a clone or a copy of the data pulled into one place for our data center purposes. This does not mean we would own the actual school's data. That is your school's data, that's internal property. We would just have a copy of that. But make sure you know what you need for yourself, for your school, your state, and your purposes. All of that information is still yours to use and apply. Is that appropriate to you? Mm-hmm. Yeah. With data, someone had mentioned that they have contracts with other entities. I'm sure you guys have contracts with assessment entities. We use Archive 3000, NWEA. So we have agreements in place where we can share data with them. And there's a limited use agreement there. They cannot share it with anyone else unless we consent to that. And the same principle will apply to this process with CEASD in the middle. Lori, yes. Very interesting discussion, a lot of food for thought. I think one challenge is as it comes to child data is it's very strict, and we're all very aware of how strict we need to be with this type of data. Looking at schools themselves and the intent of this data, the purpose of the data, I think earlier Jeff had mentioned collecting as much data as we could, but there's some restrictions that come with that. So that brings about two questions. And I know you had explained the purpose here. I'm just trying to understand better, if you can clarify the purpose here and how it pertains. So Wyatt had mentioned information as far as early bilingual education. Is that the purpose here, to really target that early education? And so just what kind of data are we really looking for and for what purpose? And then secondly, are we thinking about members themselves? So are members of themselves of CEASD? I know it's either a deaf school or in the mainstream program with large numbers of deaf and hard of hearing students. Are we not including those mainstream programs? Because we have more students now than ever in the mainstream program or setting. So just two questions there. Good questions, Lori, yes. Firstly, the intent here, Wyatt had mentioned one of our purposes here is bilingualism. So is bilingual educational approaches working? That's the question. Some schools are using bilingual approaches, other schools are not. So we want to assess data for that from the bilingual schools and compare it to data for schools that are not using those same approaches and see what is the same and what is different. I think 19 or 20 schools now are a part of NWEA, which is a good way for us to assess information there. Is NWEA really helping student growth? Are we meeting milestones, or are there other areas of assessment that we need to look into? Right, and the intent here is to really see growth in deaf schools. As it pertains to the mainstream setting and your second question, that is another part. I think doing both at the same time can be very cumbersome. So let's start with CASD member schools, and then later on build out to those mainstream programs and settings. Once we have a clear and strong foundation for the data center, then we can start working with different states. And it would be the same process. We would make sure that there's an agreement in place where they could share their information, and we could look at how these students are doing compared to students in deaf school programs. And this is long-term information that will really show the importance of the deaf school and why it's successful, or maybe not. I hope that's not the case. I am confident in our deaf schools and our ability to do better for these students. But again, this is a long-term objective of this process. Michelle. I'd also like to add that some deaf schools have mainstream settings as part of their program. So some of their data will already capture some of that perspective already. Yes, I just want to make sure I understand the focus here. So thank you for clarifying. I know the IRB process because obviously I've been through a lot of that in my experience. And so anytime child data is included, you really have to go A through Z 3 times over to make sure everything's covered. And so I just wanted to make sure I understood the focus here and the process regarded to the IRB with my experiences. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Jessica just reached out to me. So we actually have 23 schools as a part of NWEA going up and up, which is good. Any more comments? Any other comments in regards to the process here, the procedural manual? Please feel free to share. Shannon? I had a comment in regards to the data. Are we ready to discuss data, or we're not there yet? That will come up later. That's the third part of today's agenda. Unless you're talking about the process, we're looking at the procedural manual. So 2 more minutes on procedure discussion, and then we'll move into our next topic. All right, we'll go ahead and close that topic. If you hadn't had a chance to look it over, or maybe thoughts come up to you or other considerations down the road, feel free to reach out. Barbara has already shared her email in the chat. It's very easy, CASD@CASD.org. Send her an email, and then I will coordinate that information for future discussion. This is Michelle speaking. We want your feedback. It helps improve the document and start the process moving forward with a robust discussion. So your feedback would be great. Feedback on the process, and then we can establish where or what the data repository will look like. And that has a particular process as well. And we will line that up with our draft and continue building the draft until it's strong. We'll share it out, make sure everyone's comfortable. So this is a process. Nothing's going to happen overnight, unfortunately. But hopefully within the next few years, we'll get something established that is beneficial for everyone. All right, as far as the data repository, where do we hold this type of data? Where does it go? I have had discussions back in February with a few of you, and a few universities had volunteered to hold that. So we kept note of which universities were willing to do that. The last few months, I have reached out to a few of those universities. And in reaching out to them, they're saying, yeah, we can hold it, but my university is realizing that, you know, this isn't going to work for us. We have a different process in place, or we have different focuses or interests right now. And so we've started to wean out those who aren't involved. The pool of options is very limited, but I will share what I know so far, meaning that there may still be other options out there. I'm sure they exist. I'm just going to share a few ideas and see how we feel, get a pulse from the community here in this session, and see if it's a good idea or maybe not. So we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Wyatt. As Jeff already knows, this is a question that is hard for me. It can be very political in nature, not just about what school holds the data and has the capacity to run a data system, but who is that person, you know, who's the chosen one, so to speak. And it becomes a very political question, and we can't ignore that. It's part of the discussion here as far as where the best place to store this is. Thank you, Wyatt. For many of you who know me, know that I am very transparent. I will share all the information with understanding of different reasons. because it is the truth. Politicals still play a big role in everything we do these days. We have to accept that. That is a fact of our reality. So we have a few options. Firstly, CEASD ourselves can set this up and hold it, meaning we would find an individual to establish a platform. We would build it from scratch, from the ground up, is one option. The cons that come with that is the cost involved. It is very expensive. We've looked into it and I did not realize how much is involved with this. Another option is to partner with another like organization similar to CEASD. An example of that would be NAIS, National Association of Independent Schools. They already have a database established that is focused on academics, only academics. The fields within seem to be pretty good. There is room for flexibility. I have asked if we could bring our data forward and not use their data, but still use their software and their database. They said that there's a possibility for an agreement there. There would need to be further discussions. So there's potential there. Another organization I've already spoken to is NBOA, the National Business Officers Association. This is an organization that focuses on all the CFOs, so the financial people of private, charter, and independent schools. Their focus is on the financial side of things only. You know, the cost per student, tuition costs, endorsement costs, facilities, expenditures, operations, and capacity, things of that nature. Their data is very focused on operations and the day-to-day finances, which is pretty good. CEASD as an organization, we already use their BIIS, which is their platform, for the financial side of things only. So this means we have to break out the educational data and the financial data, which is kind of a con. It wouldn't all be housed in one place. NAIS and NBOA have had discussions about possibly merging or working together. So there's potential there as well, another option. There are other organizations and educational programs out there that probably do this. I haven't looked into it enough. If you know of any, please let me know. A third option is universities. So far, we've had one volunteer or one interested. Gallaudet University, as everyone may be aware, previously had their data center, the Deafness Data Center, what is it called? Gallaudet Research Institute, GRI, correct. Thank you, Wyatt. And the person who runs that has actually stepped out and has just come back. That's Russ. And they have already reached out and said that they would be interested. And they feel that this is possible, that we can make this happen. And CEASD would have their own data while using their data collection process and work. I have already, and again, with the political lens in mind, I have already reached out to NTID just to check. I didn't want Gallaudet and NTID to enter a bidding war for this. And NTID has responded with a no. As long as CEASD is owning the data, but just using other resources and people to run things, that is fine. Gallaudet should not have access to that data unless they're going through the same process as other colleges and universities to have access to that, which is totally fine. And so the important thing is we've checked on that political side of things. I haven't checked in with any other universities yet. That is something that will happen as we move forward. And we'll go ahead and rotate interpreters.
So again, with that third option, they do have that deafness expertise. And so here's what I'm presenting to you right now are the three options for your consideration. Of course, superintendents of your schools may have different thoughts, but right now we want to gather the pulse of the data individuals at the schools. Is there a resounding no to the third option or to any option? What are your thoughts here? Okay, Jessica. Okay, so my first thought is NWEA already has a process in the works for data collection, trying to figure out how to compare and contrast schools and all of that. So that process has been established. I would say for about 5 years now, they've started working on that and building that up. The other organizations that we're looking to reach out to, I mean, it's a possibility, but NWEA has that. You know, I also forgot to mention that at NWEA, we have already met with, oh goodness, it was back in the spring after our data summit, we met with NWEA and they said yes. However, it would be a very complicated process. I asked if NWEA had the potential to add supplemental data or other data. Right now, they stated that they would not be interested in that. It would be only NWEA data. And so we're trying to see how we can incorporate other data in the collection. But yes, NWEA is another possibility. Wyatt? Okay, so I'm wondering here, is Ross Mitchell here? Well, I did invite him. I'm not sure if he's joined. So if Ross is here, then I wouldn't mind hearing from him to explain about the Gallup. Oh, yes, I do see he's here. I wouldn't mind having him to kind of explain what this new GRI is looking like, how we could partner, what all that would look like. So Ross, Russ, feel free to jump in if you're paying attention. Okay, any other thoughts, opinions here? Gretchen?
I like the idea of housing it at Gallaudet or another university. I like the idea of housing it at Gallaudet just because I know there's a lot of research that we use from Gallaudet. I like the idea of having it centrally located. I think that with regards to NWEA, I don't know if everybody here is using NWEA, but we have just started using it. We've been using STAR assessments for a long time, and we have quite a bit of longitudinal data from STAR. We are pushing towards NWEA, but the data that I would be providing to your data pool would be largely based on STAR results. So until we make that transition to NWEA, I think from my perspective, and I know there's still a lot more discussion to happen, but just from my discussion and the research that I seem to depend on largely comes out of Gallaudet. That's that comment. The other comment, I felt like there was a little bit of sort of concern about owning and relinquishing data. And I think that my perspective on that is obviously CEASD is a trusted longtime organization, and I don't have any qualms about giving you my data, mainly because I'm going to be able to access other people's data. So I'm happy to be in a membership role with that. And I don't have any, and I mean, I know that you all will go through IRB process to protect yourselves because you can't hold that data without having good protection. So I completely trust you on that issue. And I have not had a chance to read the proposal, but my background is English, so I may be able to help with some wording. I may give you some wording suggestions that might ease the minds of people when they're thinking, oh, I'm completely giving you control of my data. So that's kind of just my input on that, two of those things.
Great.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. We appreciate that, Gretchen. Ross, yes, you are here now.
Hi. Remind me what you want me to inform you about, because I don't want to take up all our time with everything that's on the table right now. So.
Okay, yeah, no, let's not do that. So you and I already had a conversation, I think it was maybe a week or two ago. I think here, we're just thinking of the different possibilities of a data repository. You know, we're thinking, is CEASD going to build from scratch? Are we going to use another like-minded organization? Are we going to use Gallaudet? When I spoke with you, you said that you are now back at GRI. And so we were just kind of curious, what is the vision if GRI were to become a data repository for us? In terms of ownership, obviously CEASD would own that data, and then we would use the platform that GRI had. But just in general, how would this process work? I'm not talking about in-depth details, just give us an overview, a bird's eye view of what this process and concept would look like.
Okay, well, my understanding from our previous conversation is that what you're looking for is a contract agent to maintain a data warehouse, a data repository, and that whoever does this is separate from whatever research activity necessarily goes forward out of that repository, such that the Gallaudet or anywhere else would be in a position where they would have to treat the data repository as an outside entity with respect to research interests. That this would be a contract agent relationship rather than a research project of the university. And that what it would do as someone who would contract like NWEA would, but they actually have some interests that make their relationship a little unique relative to being merely a repository. And so the dilemma with this kind of contracting, of course, is that whether CEASD invests or Gallaudet or anywhere else invests, there are costs that go with contracting that are different from costs that go with research activities. And so we would have to work out, if Gallaudet were to do this, what its contribution would be because of its interest in being possibly the first people asked to perform the evaluation function that the repository is intended to provide, which is, can the organization produce an evaluation report that would then be disseminated to all its members, saying, you put all this stuff in, and here's the summary of what comes out. It doesn't necessarily answer any research question, answers only the question CEASD poses of its repository. And I would expect that Gallaudet would insist that it be considered that evaluator if it's going to also be the warehouse. And that would be part of what I think most universities would expect, is that, oh, my video seems to be glitching. So I'm going to turn it off if I can.
Sure, that's fine. That's okay, Ross.
So is my voice coming through?
Well, yes, we can see it through the interpreter. So the interpreter is obviously hearing
Okay.
your voice. Yes, we're good.
Right. Well, if the interpreter can hear me.
Yes, interpreter can hear you.
So let's see, the last point I wanted to make about Gallaudet being a potential host is that in order to be able to secure data in a way that works for both the schools and CEASD, we would want to know that the appropriate legal agreements with the schools for data transfer to the repository. That is, that we would consult on the matter of why the schools are giving CEASD data so that the maximum amount of information can be transferred without violating it, and that it can be done with the least administrative burden. So for example, there are certain kinds of education data that can be transferred with very limited burden for getting written permission. And there are other kinds of data which require the full burden that a regular research project would have to undertake, like individual parent permissions. As long as CEASD is a repository which is producing evaluation reports, then it's easy to have an information-rich repository. But if it's a repository for research work, then it comes under a different class of legal scrutiny. And so that would have to be worked out with anybody, whether it's Gallaudet or NWEA or NAIS or any other organization. But that's an important issue that everybody has to understand and be signing up for before Gallaudet could be a host, because we'd have to know just how much our hands are tied as your contract agent. And then we would also have to know which institution would be responsible for supervising requests for research data. Would Gallaudet or anybody else have that as part of the contract? Because the thing that you want to do is have that repository maximize your ability to learn about your education programs. And for that to be true, the management of the data has to include not just feedback to the member institutions, but it has to include release to external research requests, and that has an administrative cost. And so who's going to bear that and who's going to review that is something that'll have to be worked out in the contract. But that's important to lay out now so that the member institutions understand that whoever does this, there's a whole lot of behind the scenes work that we're aware of that's necessary to be in compliance with the law and to be a trustworthy organization for everybody who's contributing data. And I'll stop there.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, Ross, for that good overview. I am sure that as we are going through this process, we will have to figure out that data and if it's going to be a more complicated red taped procedure or not. We will have this discussion further on. I don't want to go too deep into the woods right now, but I want to just kind of get a general idea of kind of what we're looking for. We will be starting this discussion fairly soon. Now, for those in attendance today, do you have any other questions or thoughts? You can bring up your video, you can put them in the chat. If not, then we will go ahead and go into the third part, the most exciting part, which is the type of data we are wanting to collect. I know you are waiting for this. Michelle? I did want to add very briefly, I do like the idea of using Gallaudet. I think the other options are, the cost is very extensive. And then trying to figure out, just like-minded organizations, how we're going to combine is going to be a challenge. I do think that Gallaudet, they are involved in the field of deaf education. They understand that perspective. And it seems reasonable to use their platform as a repository. That's just my suggestion. And Gallaudet has the IRBs. Right. They have everything kind of ready, set, go. And I think, I feel like it would be a good partner for this field. It makes sense to me. It's just my opinion, just throwing that out there. Okay, Shannon. Yeah, what Ross said made me realize, I don't really understand that first option as much. Do you mind expanding upon what that would look like? for that first option, oh, the CEASD option, okay. That means that CEASD would have to purchase software, hardware, develop a database platform, hire a staff member to develop, and then also develop a board who could be involved with the IRB process. We would partner with a university for that process. It is an extensive list of what all is involved, and the cost is also very high. So I threw out CSD building from scratch, but my understanding of the cost involved, CEASD may not be able to feasibly do that unless there is an influx of funding specifically for this reasoning. I think the other universities, other people say yes, that the other options are good as long as we keep that data separate and develop a rigorous procedure to ensure so. I think several people are very comfortable with that process, but I don't want to speak for others just yet. I think this will be an ongoing discussion once we move forward in this whole process. Okay, thank you. Wyatt, did you have something you wanted to say? No, I think just keep in mind that the pro of CEASD, if they could afford to start from scratch, would be the complete independence. That's really the one positive that comes with that first option. However, CEASD is not billionaire organization, right? So obviously the feasibility of the cost involved is not there. But, Barbara and I did have this conversation, and obviously if we are committed to going in that direction, we would be asking for federal grant funding for this project. And we feel like that would be an easy ask. Right now, there is no clear data related to deaf, hard of hearing education in one centralized place. So I think that is also another good discussion point, that if we decide to do CEASD as the option and develop a completely autonomous center, then we could go that way. We would just have to ask for certain funding. All right, looking at our time, I do want to move on to our third point, the data. I am not going to throw out any type of options of data. I want to open the floor up to all of the individuals in this meeting. What type of data are you interested in? What type of data do you feel we should collect? The floor is now yours. I don't want you to feel hesitant in terms of throwing out this data, thinking about the HIPAA rules or the FERPA legislation. I just want you to be open-minded. What type of data do you want to see from CEASD? What data will help your schools thrive? That's the purpose of this. The floor is yours. Switching interpreters.
Oh, your researchers are going to grab the whole floor if no one speaks up. All right, Gretchen.
I'm just throwing this out because you said so. One thing that I really feel that is missing in the data collection that I do is the comparison groups. I am unable to compare deaf to deaf. And anytime I try to do anything at the state level, it's deaf to other special ed or deaf to hearing mainstream. And I want that deaf to deaf comparison, in every area, obviously language and reading and English, but also this school's doing the bilingual.
And comparing exactly what? Just, I want to understand exactly what you're looking at here.
I mean, I think I feel like I have focused so much on reading levels, which really is, it just seems to be time consuming. I am thinking about starting some writing, some WAC program writing across the curriculum here, and doing research on that myself. And so I'm a big proponent of writing skills because that's what takes anybody, deaf, hearing, that's kind of where people project into the workforce and college and, just in life. And I feel like here in the whole state of Arkansas, not just in our deaf education programs, but writing is, it's not done across the curriculum. And then you have kids that go to college, and I teach Comp 1 and Comp 2 at the college level, and they don't know how to write an argument paper. So I feel like that writing is something I'd like to look at along with reading. I feel like we put a lot of emphasis on AR reading levels and Lexile levels, but I would like to see some more of writing comparisons from deaf to deaf. I'm tired of comparing deaf to others. I don't want apples to oranges.
Thank you. Stacy? I also want to share my support with what Gretchen shared. The writing part is something we need. We need those comparisons for deaf writers. I'd also like to think of the comparisons for all of the residential schools. This is so that we can see if a school is doing wonderful in mathematics, and what are they doing? What are they using to be wonderful? But what's being effective there? So that we can all benefit and bolster our own programs for student improvement. So comparing deaf school to deaf school is great, but in addition to that, it would be nice if we could do those mainstream setting deaf students with our residential school or deaf school program students. It would be nice to be able to compare if having deaf parents or having hearing parents is a factor. Parents who speak Spanish only, if that's a factor. So really breaking that down to every facet and comparing all of those different things. And I know that our numbers are really small. So NWEA wants to partner with us in order to help look at these analytics with the small numbers. So we just need more schools to be on board with this process. And that's in a perfect world, right? We'd be able to compare all of those different facets. Thank you, Stacy. And this is Michelle speaking, I do agree. Shannon? Two thoughts here. In looking at the documented proposal for the data plan, I haven't looked at all of the ins and outs yet. I have noticed that demographics is a part of that, in addition to NWEA and their items. When it comes to the demographics, you had mentioned entering and exiting schools or programs. I think that is important. I was wondering if maybe we should add entering from, looking at where they're coming from. Is it another deaf school or something else? So it'd be nice to know how long they have experience in a bilingual program, ASL English program. Just one suggestion. And I do need to look at this more closely and reach out to you later and follow up. But I think when it comes to NWEA, one thing I have noticed marked here is the date of assessment or test itself and the RIT score. I find myself with RIT scores and being standalone information, not really being enough information in a vacuum, because how RIT scores determine students' grades and not history, but there's just a few factors that come into RIT scores. So I think it may be important to include percentiles in addition to conditional growth percentiles. And this really brings forward the history of growth and development. And we can also compare by maybe students who have severe gaps in their language and compare them within their own group, peers, if you will, as opposed to comparing them to the general population. It just doesn't seem fair. That growth doesn't come back in a fair way. So I think breaking that down is good. I think is it CPG, is that correct? Conditional growth percentiles, I think is important to consider here. Thank you, Shannon. Jessica? And so in a perfect world, right? In a perfect world, right? Yeah. We have a bilingual program. So really, we'd like to be able to compare the ASL skills and how that is impacting the English skills. and vice versa, how they're impacting each other and their respective developments. Their ASL development and how that compares with everything else, right? Because if you don't have the ASL skills, how can you learn other concepts? How can you understand and process information and concepts and all of that? So in a perfect world, I would love to be able to compare those, the ASL skills and how that is really impacting everything else educationally. And how early did an individual have access? Did they have access to ASL from birth? Did they have access at 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5 when they got to school? We have several students who come in during middle school. Even this year, we've had 5 or 6 new students who are coming in. They're in middle school, high school level, they're secondary with no signability. And how does that impact their language development? How does that impact their conceptual understanding? How does that compare with other schools? Thank you. Good feedback. I see in the chat a lot of ideas being shared, a lot of thoughts. We will save that chat and compile it. I love when people share specific assessments or evaluations that they're using. That is nice. It's nice to see how many schools are tracking what types of data, and that this will really help us determine the data we want to track. So keep on sharing this feedback if you're not sharing via video. Gretchen. You're on mute.
Sorry. Shannon's comment made me think about, so when we, and this may be a procedural thing, but when we submit data to you, like suppose I give you star data and not MAP scores, which we are working on getting more MAP scores. It's just one thing, the problem with MAP is there's no raw score, so we can't get percentages off of that. And then we like to give parents grade level scores, which I don't particularly care for that, but that's the policy that we have. And so that would be a question. The other thing too is that we are talking about this in the chat, the ASL, because we're working on that as well. And part of the problem that we have with our ASL assessments is they also don't have raw scores or percentiles. And that's what makes it so hard to do this comparison. So do you have some sort of idea of how you would collect that for us as members of your organization, and how maybe you could help us do those conversions and comparisons?
A good question. I think through this process, it'll be apparent as we have more discussions at CEASD and see what types of assessments other schools are using. We may be able to narrow that down to a particular set of assessments that schools should be using. And this should clarify some of the comparative data. And I think this is where the discussion will lead to eventually. However, every state has their own state assessment that they have to adhere to as well. And we all understand that. That's just the world we live in as educators. So with ASL assessments, there are several different ASL assessments. So which one is the most appropriate? Which one is good? And that's an ongoing discussion as we move forward. Assessments change over time, STAR to NWEA. Schools will be switching the assessments they use. Some schools have the ability to use several assessments. Other schools are a little more limited in their ability to assess. And so these are all factors that will be challenges. I think that we can at least develop some sort of norm for comparative data, and that'll be one of our last objectives, definitely. Thank you for your feedback. Any other thoughts from any other members? I do see a lot of comments in language and communication use in the home, a lot of comments about diversity and different learning styles, socioeconomic status, things like that. This is important data that we're looking to collect as well, of course. Any other thoughts? Yes, Michelle. I'd like to add one more thing here. It would be nice if we had an individual teaching this or instructing as opposed to instructing virtually over Zoom. So it'd be nice to collect that data. Yes, Utah and ASD have online schools right now. And so, yeah, this is a new facet of data as well, correct? Any other thoughts? I know there's been a lot of information shared today, or maybe everyone's still processing. You need some time to take notes. That's totally okay. That is the intent of today's discussion, and it will be ongoing. Nothing's being finalized. And that's a good point with the norms. And this is something where maybe I will depend more on the researchers on how we can really narrow down those norms. That is quite the challenge. Sometimes that process will help us establish a baseline where we can look at how we want to write things and really dig down to the heart of things. Or maybe we develop a new set of assessments from that. There's a lot of potential there from that research. And so there's a lot of different ways to really navigate that. Wyatt, you can speak a little more to that. In my mind, the biggest challenge for creating a set of norms is the N, right? That N factor. And so you see in deaf education a lot of struggles because schools are small compared to the public school setting, to mainstream schools, so those general schools. And so that creates an issue in of itself where we cannot assess to the same depth. You know, what about the education? What about the approach? What about the assessments? What about this and that and that and this? Because we're so isolated or in silos. I personally hope and predict that as the database is established and grows, it will naturally organically lead to more norms or consistent practice in assessment in deaf schools as we move forward. And over time, we become more normed across the board. Those norms present themselves. And so, you know, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? That's kind of the question. So we have to create this first to get to the other side of things. And we don't need to view that as a barrier for now. We'll approach that the best we can with what we have and be careful in interpreting data because we know that deaf schools are different from other schools. We don't want to compare apples and oranges. And hopefully 10, 15 years from now, we're a little more consistent. We have those norms and, you know, everyone's an apple. There's no oranges. Yes, Michelle. That was actually my comment too, Wyatt. While we establish this database and other people come on board, they may see what we're doing in the research that we're conducting and be a part of that. That's why we joined up with NWEA. We saw other deaf schools there, which creates more opportunity for data. I see that same opportunity here. So I agree with you, Wyatt. Good question here from the chat. Do we have a list of other schools? That is information we're collecting now. NWEA is one very strong hub right now, just to be honest with you. I remember only about 3 or 4 schools being a part of NWEA. Now we're at 23, which is nice. Will more schools be a part of that? That is the question. We'll see as we move forward. I'm sure superintendents are learning here as well and moving forward as well. And as we see the data start to narrow in, maybe there'll be more buy-in. So again, even with 23 schools there, that you know, that end piece is a lot bigger than it was years ago, which is good. And so there will be other ASL assessments and language growth development assessments. A lot of them are using the bring-ins for younger kids, which is also an option. So there's a lot of options out there. All right, any other thoughts? I am seeing a lot of ideas shared in the chat. I'll look at that closer later. We are right on schedule, which is good. We're going to look at establishing 3 groups. Some people may be more interested in particular groups. So after this meeting, Barbara will send out an email to all of the members here in asking for first, second, and third choice based on interest of our 3 talking points today. I will try to respect everyone's first choice. However, I'm afraid that one group will have the tendency to be much larger than the other 2. At the end, everyone will have input in all 3 talking points. We're trying to set up equal numbers in committees so that we can continue more in-depth discussions moving forward to develop clear pathways for all 3 talking points. In February, each of these groups will report out on their progress in their respective area. We'll pull that together and present it at the CEASD conference with the superintendents. We want to make sure everyone can hear your thoughts. And of course, most of you will speak with your respective superintendents as well. And this will create an aggregation of all of this data as we develop a roadmap moving forward for this process. As I alluded to earlier, this will take some time. The goal is not to have this too far out. We want to have this done before I retire. That's my plan. I don't want to retire soon anyhow. I think that in some ways, as the work moves forward, it will really align with the Cogswell-Macy Act, which is finally making some progress, breaking some grounds. So we're looking forward to that. And we're looking to see this parallel and really line up and hopefully come together at the end. Okay, curriculum and instruction practices. Yes, that's a good point. And that would be part of the other strand of CEASD's strategic goals. It's really more with LRE, least restrictive environment, and EI, early intervention. So we'll discuss that a lot. And that happens the first Thursday of every month. Most of the administrative leaders will be a part of those discussions as well. I encourage you to talk to your administrator about that strand and to monitor that as CEASD makes more progress in that direction. We will reach out to schools and have discussions and those conversations. All right, I think that sums up the committee information. We will send that out, Barbara will. We will also have opportunities for people to share their thoughts and feedback and look to collect that information as we move forward. Any other closing thoughts or suggestions? The floor is open. We have about 12 minutes remaining before we wrap up. Other thoughts? Yes, Wyatt. This is a thought that came up during our first summit. I think it would be great to reiterate that here in this session. And I think Jeff agrees with me in addition to others. This is really an intent to support deaf schools in their growth and thriving. It's not intended to create competition or superiority amongst schools. We want to see collaboration and we want to see everyone bringing each other up and bolstering each other's programs. So as we move forward, of course, at the beginning, some deaf schools will think, hey, I'm doing really good, and then find out later that, hey, maybe it's not as good as I thought. And the intent is not to embarrass or make your program look bad. The intent is, hey, we caught that now. That's a good thing. Now let's help you bolster this specific area of your program, or let's help you find a new structure or a new approach. And so I think it's important that every time we get together that I reiterate this intent. I don't want to see any trepidation or fallout at the end of this process. And that's a good point, Wyatt. I think your point is very important and valid. We have discussed that in the past, and superintendents have discussed that amongst ourselves. The data is not intended to be used for making anyone look bad or making ourselves look better than anyone else. That is not the intent here. The intent is, if a school is doing well, great. Let's look at why that's doing so well, that particular facet, and what's making that successful, and how can we share that with other schools and programs? Let's grow everyone. Or even having discussions from that and saying, you know, why is a deaf school better than the mainstream setting? Not to be critical on mainstream settings. I was in a mainstream setting myself. However, you know, are there other things that we're not considering? Maybe some schools are down a particular pathway and they're not realizing that there's other options that work. And so just starting to look at other options to develop and become a stronger school. That's really the intent here, to support everyone's program. And that's what CSD has always been about. We'll go ahead and rotate interpreters.
All right, any other closing thoughts, comments? Okay, everyone's still mulling it all over. So we are going to reconvene in February, but between now and February, these 3 committees will need to meet twice. Hopefully, once we establish those committees, we will send you out some dates and some meeting times to help you establish the committee meetings. Typically Thursday is pretty good. We have the first, second, or third Thursdays of the month on schedule. But again, you will be in continued dialogue about those 3 talking points. All right, thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your day. And I appreciate all of your input that was part of this session. You're doing what CEASD's vision is, which is helping children thrive. Thank you so much. Have a great day. All right. Thank you, Wyatt and Michelle. Thank you, interpreters, for your wonderful interpretation. Bye.